Okay, but look at the part where the road literally splits. You're forced to choose between an arrow that says pleasing God and one that says trusting God, and you can't pick both.
Right. Yeah, it's set up as this like a hard, mutually exclusive fork in the road.
I have to be honest, reading that feels like a trick. It feels like a massive trap. I mean, my entire life, culturally, religiously, whatever, you are taught that pleasing God and trusting God are the exact same thing.
Oh, absolutely. They're totally conflated.
Right. To suddenly have this text come out and say, no, you must choose one, and choosing one means abandoning the other, it literally feels like being asked to choose between your heart and your lungs. It's an impossible choice. What do you even mean I have to pick one?
It definitely feels like a trick. Well, until you really unpack the mechanics of why it's framed this way.
Mhm.
If you look closely at the psychology of, pleasing God
Mm.
as a primary motivation, it implies a strictly transactional relationship. It's entirely based on human striving. Like, it's about self-made excellence.
Yeah.
Think about any relationship in your own life. If you are desperately, anxiously trying to please someone,
Like constantly monitoring their reactions.
exactly. If you are constantly monitoring their facial expressions, weighing your own performance, terrified of letting them down, you aren't actually trusting them at all.
Oh, wow, yeah. Because trust implies safety. And if I'm constantly trying to please you, I don't feel safe with you. I'm just, waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Yeah, you are managing the relationship. You are managing them. So the argument here is that this fork in the road is the defining moment of human psychology and theology,
Okay.
because we are generally operating under this overarching massive lie.
Right.
And that lie breaks down into two very distinct parts, which is we do not see God as he is, and we do not see ourselves as we are.
And you, listening to this, you've probably felt this in your own life, that utter exhaustion of trying to manage how people or how God see you.
Oh, it's exhausting.
Totally.
Yeah.
And because we buy into that lie, because we almost always take the pleasing God path, we inevitably end up walking right into what the text describes as the room of good intentions.
Yes. And the room of good intentions is such a perfect name for it because people there really do mean well. I mean, they are genuinely trying hard to be good people.
Right. They aren't villains.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
But because they are relying on self-made excellence, it creates an environment where everyone is absolutely terrified of being exposed as a fraud, which forces every single person in that room to wear a mask.
And the breakdown of these different types of mask wearers is fascinating.
It categorizes exactly how unresolved pain manifests when we're trying to hide it. You have the cynical and smug ones, for starters,
The critics.
right? These are the people who use their insight and their intellect as a literal shield. They stand on the fringes, they critique everything, they deconstruct everyone else's beliefs, but it's pure self-protection, so they never have to be vulnerable themselves.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then you have the bitter ones. They just lash out at anything that has structure. They create straw men out of their enemies just so they can publicly ridicule them. But then we get to the most terrifying group of all, which is the Pedigreed.
Okay, I have to jump in here. Because I see the cynical and bitter masks everywhere, I even see them in myself sometimes, but I want to push back a little on how the Pedigreed are handled here.
Okay, go for it.
Because they are framed as the most dangerous people in the room, but these are the successful people. These are the ones with the elegant masks. They're the generous executives, the social justice workers, the people with incredible, polished gentility.
Yeah, they look great on paper.
Right. They don't even realize they are wearing a mask because their lives look so functional and good. I mean, how are they the most dangerous?
Because that is exactly why they're dangerous. It's so convincing. It's what gets categorized as the Gnostic illusion of self-managed maturity.
Hold on. Unpack Gnostic illusion for a second. To a layperson, what does that actually mean in practice?
Right, so Gnosticism traditionally involves this idea of secret knowledge or enlightenment elevating you above the physical broken world.
Mm.
So in this context, the illusion of self-managed maturity is the false belief that your intense personal discipline or your intellect or your moral rule following can elevate you above human brokenness.
Got it.
It's the illusion that you don't actually need grace or vulnerability or help because you can just manage your own maturity through sheer willpower.
Right. And the imagery used to describe this in the text is brutal, but completely perfect. It's the idea that you can have this massive, unresolved internal infection, this deep, hidden brokenness or trauma.
Yeah.
And you can exercise and you can dress nicely and you can build an amazing resume and you can smile at everybody. But at the end of the day, no matter how much you achieve, an unresolved infection just makes you a well-dressed, sick person with nicely combed hair.
That is a staggering image.
Yeah.
Just staggering. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the reason the Pedigreed mask is so destructive isn't just about the internal rot of the person wearing it. It's about what it teaches everyone else in the room.
Right.
When you wear an elegant, impenetrable mask of success and moralism, you are actively teaching your kids, your friends, your coworkers a terrifying lesson.
You're showing them how to hide.
Exactly. You are teaching them that self-protection is their only hope. You are teaching them that it is fundamentally better to be unknown than to ever risk rejection.
Which is devastating. You're implicitly teaching your kids, hide, keep it together, because if they see the real you, if they see your mess, you're done.
Yeah.
And because we are constantly maintaining these masks, it creates this unbelievable exhaustion. It's a pressure cooker. And that causal chain inevitably leads to the cycle of acting out. It leads directly to self-sabotage.
Right. Think about the woman we read about in the text, the one with the emotionally guarded father.
Yes.
That case study is a perfect illustration of this cycle.
She had the dad who was super successful, right?
Yeah, she grew up with a dad who was highly competent, very successful, but completely absent emotionally. His praise was always measured, and the only time she got real affirmation was if she achieved something public, something he could brag about.
Right. So her childhood story, the underlying narrative that got hardwired into her brain, wasn't just, I need to do better. It was deeply existential. It was, I am fundamentally not enough.
Exactly. And who can survive in a world where they aren't even worth their own father's affection?
Yeah.
You can't.
No.
So as a survival mechanism, she quietly and deliberately transforms herself. She becomes incredibly athletic. She learns to dress perfectly. She becomes highly articulate and educated. She essentially builds the ultimate pedigreed mask.
And she even marries a guy just like her dad, right?
A man who is highly competent and emotionally guarded. So to the outside world, she has it entirely together. But internally, she is carrying suitcases of unresolved junk.
And this unresolved junk leads to what the text calls the permission system, which is a concept that completely shifted how I view addiction and acting out.
It's the vulnerability loop.
Yeah.
When you look at her acting out, her sin, you want to use that word, it wasn't actually about physical pleasure or hedonism at all. It was entirely about conquest.
What do you mean by conquest?
She would use her intellect and her looks to draw in competent, attractive, powerful men just to see if they would risk something for her. She didn't even necessarily want to sleep with them. She just needed to know that if she wanted to proceed, they would go along with it.
Wow.
It was a desperate, twisted mechanism to prove she was finally enough, to capture the attention and the risk that her father never gave her.
I have to jump in here, because when we were going over this part, I had a massive epiphany. This right here completely explains why traditional self-help fails. Why 99% of the books on overcoming bad habits or addiction or self-sabotage simply do not work.
Because they're targeting the wrong part of the timeline.
Exactly. Almost every self-help book is hyper-focused on the moment of temptation. It's all behavior modification. When you feel the urge to do X, do Y instead. Count to 10. Do a breathing exercise. Call an accountability partner.
Right. Treating the symptom.
But based on this vulnerability loop, the game is completely over by the time the temptation hits. The permission system, that underlying false narrative of, I am not enough, granted the permission to fail weeks, months, or even years ago.
Yeah.
It's like trying to put out a roaring house fire by painting over the smoke damage. If the battle is lost in your subconscious identity before the event even happens, how do you actually break the cycle? You can't just willpower your way out of a permission system that is running in the background of your brain 24/7.
No, you can't. You've hit on the exact transition point where human striving fails. Willpower and good intentions are completely, utterly useless against a deeply ingrained permission system. You cannot fix an identity problem with behavioral techniques.
So what's the fix?
Well, the only way out, the only actual cure, is a total radical shift in identity. Leaving the room of good intentions entirely, taking off the mask, and entering what's described as the room of grace.
And this is where a theological bombshell gets dropped that completely derailed me, because it rewrites the script entirely. The concept is that believers, people who have actually stepped into this room of grace, are not sinners saved by grace. They are actually saints who sin.
It is a massive paradigm shift. It goes against almost everything mainstream religion teaches.
No, wait, the specific logic used here. The idea that Jesus didn't become theoretical sin. He became real sin. He actually became sin in every possible physical and spiritual way.
Right, totally absorbed it.
So if the corollary holds, we don't become theoretical righteousness. We don't just get a free pass at the pearly gates while remaining absolute garbage on the inside. We are real righteousness in every possible way. That is fucking insane. That
Yes.
completely rewrites the entire religious script of the last 2,000 years.
It really does. Because millions of people are walking around living their daily lives out of the core conviction that they are basically not very good people who are desperately trying to be very, very good.
Yes.
They view God as over there and
Yeah.
themselves here with a massive, uncrossable trash heap of their own sin in between.
Right. The classic saved sinner mentality, like, I'm just a worm, lucky to be allowed in the building.
Yes. But the argument here is that if you are a new creation, you genuinely have a new nature. Your core identity has fundamentally changed.
The biological analogy here really clicked for me. The idea of a biologist looking at caterpillar DNA. If you take a caterpillar to a geneticist and ask them to analyze it, they will look at the results and say, scientifically, completely, this is a butterfly.
Right.
Now, it looks nothing like a butterfly. It's fuzzy, it crawls on the dirt, it eats leaves. But the DNA of a perfectly complete butterfly identity is already wired into that creature long before it ever acts or looks like one.
And you don't berate the caterpillar for not flying.
Exactly. You don't yell at a caterpillar to be more like a butterfly. You don't give it a 10-step self-help book on how to grow wings faster.
Because it will naturally mature into what is already true about it.
Yeah.
That's the crux of it. The argument is that humans who have stepped into this room of grace have the actual DNA of righteousness wired into them. You are a saint. Nothing you do will make you more righteous than you already are at this exact second.
Okay, that sounds beautiful, but I gotta be honest, that's a tough pill to swallow for anyone who manages people or raises kids or just watches the news.
Oh, for sure.
Because here's the pushback. If you literally go out and tell people, God is crazy about you on your worst day, you have the DNA of righteousness, you're completely pleasing to him right now, no matter what you do, no strings attached. Won't people just take massive advantage of that?
That's the fear.
Right, won't they just say, great, I'm righteous anyway, time to do whatever the hell I want? I mean, give human nature an inch, it takes a mile.
It's the most logical human question to ask, and it's honestly the reason most religious institutions are terrified of preaching actual grace. But the rebuttal to that fear is fascinating. The answer is no. They won't take advantage of God because they no longer want to.
Because the DNA changed.
Exactly. Let's look at the physics of how human motivation actually works. The motive of a truly righteous heart is not to find loopholes to get away with something. The core motive of the righteous is to love and be loved. What's fascinating here is that the script is flipped entirely. It is actually moralism. The strict law of religious practice, the constant focus on rules, the anxiety of doing better that keeps people trying to get away with something.
Oh, that makes so much sense. When you are under a strict law, human nature immediately starts looking for loopholes. We want to know exactly where the line is so we can put our toes right up against it.
But when you are unconditionally loved and your identity is completely secure regardless of your performance, the rebellion loses all of its fuel. You don't need to act out to prove you're autonomous or to test if you're loved, because the answer is already a definitive yes.
That is just, it's a completely different gravity. It's a different physics for how human beings operate. But we have to pivot here because things take a very dark turn when we look at the alternative.
Very dark.
What happens to the people who refuse this? The people who stay at the fork in the road or who stay in that room of good intentions and they absolutely refuse to drop their masks. They demand fairness. They demand justice for how they've been hurt.
Yes, the spiral of bitterness.
Yeah.
If you refuse the cure of radical grace, the alternative isn't just staying stagnant. You don't just pause. It's a brutal, progressive, downward spiral into psychological isolation.
Let's unpack the mechanics of that spiral, because reading about how bitterness actually operates was chilling.
It almost always starts with an obsession over a real wrong done to you. But we have to look at why that obsession takes such deep root. When you refuse to be vulnerable, when you stay in that room of good intentions wearing your mask of perfection, your brain's defense mechanism has to work overtime to maintain the illusion that your mask is real.
Because admitting fault shatters the mask.
Exactly. If you are perfect or righteous on your own merits, then any conflict must be entirely the other person's fault. You demand justice, because admitting you played a part would mean taking off the mask.
And that demand for absolute justice makes you completely irrational. Because reality is messy. You become hypersensitive, constantly scanning for slight offenses to prove you're the victim.
And it becomes exhausting for even your closest friends to be around you. You become an unsafe person, because every single interaction is a test of loyalty. which leads to the propaganda phase.
The propaganda phase is so real. You see this in bad breakups, in family fallouts, in workplace drama. You become desperately intent on telling your side of things to absolutely anyone who will listen. You start thinly veiling character assassinations of your enemies as prayer requests or just needing to vent. And if your friends don't want to carry your banner, if they don't want to take up your offense with the exact same level of rage, you alienate them, you cut them off.
And this is where the psychology gets genuinely terrifying. It's what we can call the ultimate delusion. Because you rehearse your defense so many times, you poll test your story with so many people, that your propaganda literally pollutes your own memory.
That detail blew my mind. The idea that you can quote perfectly what defends your case, but you literally cannot remember history accurately anymore. Your brain has physically rewritten the past to make you the absolute flawless victim and them the absolute irredeemable villain. You believe your own lies.
It's cognitive dissonance taken to its absolute extreme. Your brain alters reality to protect the mask. And this psychological rewriting leads to the final, most tragic step of this entire bitterness spiral, making God the enemy.
Walk through the logic of that. How do you get from being mad at a coworker or an ex to concluding God is your enemy?
It's a dark but completely inevitable logical progression. If you are entirely consumed by your demand for justice, and your brain has rewritten history to prove you are entirely, flawlessly in the right, you eventually look up at heaven.
Yeah.
And you say, if God were actually fair, if God actually cared about truth and justice, he would have acted on my behalf by now. He would have vindicated me and punished them.
But he hasn't. The lightning bolt hasn't struck.
Exactly. And because he hasn't struck down your enemies, and because you refuse to believe you could possibly be wrong, you draw the only conclusion left. God must be defending your enemy. God is on their side.
Oh, wow. So you're entirely alone. You've alienated your friends, and now you've alienated the universe.
Completely isolated. At that point, your worship becomes nothing more than a bluff. You might still go through the religious motions, you might still sit in the pew or say the prayers, but you don't actually speak to God anymore, except to bark out questions about his motives. You've locked yourself in a prison of your own demand for justice.
It's a horrifying picture of what happens when we insist on protecting ourselves instead of trusting. It goes all the way back to the beginning, choosing to manage the relationship instead of resting in it.
Yeah.
Which brings us to how we pull back from that cliff. To avoid that bitter end, we have to look at the massive risk this idea of grace is inviting us to take. Because stepping into the room of grace is a risk. It means dropping the mask.
And the way to process that risk is through these rapid-fire what-if scenarios. Imagine God speaking directly to you, stripping away all the religious conditioning, all the transactional expectations.
Right, like what if there are no logs of past offenses? What if the universe isn't keeping a tally of how little you pray, or how often you let people down, or how messy your internal life is?
What if there is no secret agenda? No trapdoor waiting to drop you into punishment the moment you finally let your guard down and slip up?
What if the entire basis of your friendship with God isn't about how little you sin, but simply how much you allow him to love you?
And what if, and this is the one that dismantles the fear of vulnerability entirely, what if you can hurt my heart, but I will never, ever hurt yours?
That completely disarms the fear that drives the masks. If you know you can't be hurt in return, the mask is suddenly useless. It's just extra weight.
It is. It renders self-protection completely obsolete.
And it all culminates in this one final provocative thought. It's a concept that I just cannot stop thinking about because it flies in the face of every self-improvement instinct we have. It asks, what if it was less important that anything ever gets fixed than that nothing ever has to be hidden?
Wow.
Let me say that again because we really need to hear it. What if it was less important that anything ever gets fixed than that nothing ever has to be hidden? Think about your own life right now. Think about the things you are desperately trying to fix, the broken parts of yourself you are constantly managing, the masks you are wearing so people won't reject you. What would actually happen if you stopped obsessing over fixing yourself and instead just walked out the front door completely unhidden?